Okay. So, yes, in addition to being a media buyer, I have found my way into being passionate about measurement as well, especially as the landscape gets more fragmented. Last touch reporting becomes less and less reliable. Data privacy makes using cookie reporting less reliable. And so, how do we measure the results of all of the hard work that we're doing? I'm going to start the slideshow in a minute, but basically, this is going to be a presentation in two parts. One, just a general overview of how we think about this practice using Facebook and search as an example. And then I'm going to dive into CTV as its own topic, since that is definitely an area of interest for a lot of marketers. So let me get right into it. All right. So I pick up this presentation at the point of you've run your holdout tests, you've built your models, you have multipliers, and the question is kind of like, what do I do now? And during my time in measurement advisory, one of the things I realized in that process was, a lot of the measurement companies out there, they provide great advice and service on how to create tests, how to interpret tests, and they hold your hand throughout the process. But a lot of times the guidance can kind of stop right at the point of getting a result. And marketers are kind of left to their own devices to figure out, okay, how do I actually use this? And I think that that's one of the hardest parts of the process, because that's where the marketer has to really decide, how strongly do I believe in this result? Is it changing what I thought I knew about marketing all along? Is this going to kind of resonate with other stakeholders in my companies? Am I really altering the way that we think about our marketing program? And so there can be a lot of emotion, a lot of decision that needs to happen, and not a lot of guidance at this point in the process. So this is an area that Madonna and I really try to provide that extra guidance in. So you'll probably notice here, we talk about the decision matrix, and you might have talked about that already a bit in some of the intro conversations, but having a decision matrix ahead of time is really important. And so it helps you kind of anticipate, depending on what result I get back, what is my decision going to be? It can take a lot of the emotion out of it when the result actually gets back. It can take the sting out of it, and it gives you a clear roadmap before you start the journey. So in this case, if we were to think about this before we ran the test, if we had a goal ROAS of $2.50, we would say, okay, if we get a multiplier back that gives me a $3 or above ROAS, that's definitely going to be a scale. I know I'm going to want to invest in this channel. If I'm slightly below my goal, I may want to pare it back a little bit. And if it's really not performing as well as I thought it was, then we might have to make some hard decisions about cutting budget. So you map that out ahead of time. And then you kind of start on the road of making these decisions. And so in this case, we have this example just uses Facebook prospecting, search non-brand, pretend we got these multiplier results back, 76% on Facebook, 79% on search non-brand. Why did I pick these two tactics for this example? This is usually a really great first starting point when a brand decides to kind of move into this approach. One being because Facebook prospecting is typically where the bulk of a budget is being spent. So you're definitely going to want to validate that pretty quickly. And with search non-brand, we find a lot of brands, before they endeavor on this advanced attribution process, are usually heavily underinvested in this tactic. And it's this analysis that gives them the ammunition they need in order to invest more in this critical tactic. So that's why we've used these two examples. So what do I do with these numbers? So I like to think of it in 3 steps. Apply your multiplier, compare it to your ROAS goal, and then go to the platforms and optimize. And so you'll notice, right, that the optimization part, there's actually a few steps before you actually go back into your platform and make changes. So first, in the apply step, we now have to do some calculations based off of our last touch numbers to actually translate that into advanced attributed numbers. So you'll see here on this slide a little abbreviated snippet of what might be your Excel spreadsheet or your Google Doc or your BI tool. But think of this as you're going to get an export from your platform, and now you need to add a few more columns. So whereas traditionally you might have looked at ROAS directly in your platform, now you need to kind of add a new column called advanced attributed ROAS, is how we frame it. And how do you derive that? You take your multiplier and you multiply the platform revenue, that whatever that individual platform says it contributed to your performance, multiply that by your revenue, you get your new advanced attributed revenue. And then you calculate ROAS exactly as you would have done in the past, except now you're using advanced attributed revenue over your spend. And so think of it as just adding those sister columns to whatever your last touch metrics were. And you can do the same thing with CPA as well, your incremental orders, and calculate your new incremental CPA. And so there's a little bit of math that happens before we get into the platform. And the next step, once you have this new advanced attributed ROAS, you're going to compare how these platforms are doing compared to your goal. You'll notice this is just like what you would have done in the past, right? And so a lot of this is very similar, which is great. So in terms of where you used to compare your last touch ROAS to your goal and make a decision about scaling or reducing, in this new world, you're just going to use your advanced attributed ROAS to make that same decision. And sometimes the decision is the same, and sometimes it's different depending on how that multiplier adjusts your results. And in this case, one thing I want to call out is this is one particular example where this advertiser or this brand had a kind of platform, kind of pre-advanced attribution goal of 350. When they moved into using these advanced multipliers, their goal, they actually shifted their goal as well to 250. One thing this presentation isn't meant to do is tell you what your goal should be and whether or not it should change based on which world you're doing. Something that's I found really interesting in doing this work is there's a lot of different ways that a brand will come to the decision of what its goal should be. And there's no one right answer. And sometimes there isn't even an answer at all. Sometimes people don't know, marketers don't know why their goal is their goal. Somebody told them it was their goal. That was the goal that was there before they got there. Sometimes marketers really have a great understanding of why it's their goal because they're the ones that calculated, they're the ones that poured over spreadsheets of numbers. Sometimes finance gives them their goal. So there's all different ways to come about the goal. Whatever that is, this is a process about comparing your actual results to that goal. And so in that process, just using this example to start, the Facebook example, it ends up being a scale decision in both cases, even though our advanced attributed ROAS is slightly lower than it was last touch, still very strong. And what's really interesting here is that Search Non-Brand originally, the decision would have been to reduce when comparing it to its goal, which is, we find brands time and again being like, I can't spend in Search Non-Brand. Search Brand is doing so much better. I have to put my money there. But really, Search Non-Brand is performing in ways that aren't going to show up in your last touch numbers. And when you move to advanced attribution, you can actually get a whole decision, which is a really good step forward for eventually being able to scale. I will pause there if there's any questions before we move on to actually optimizing. Right. Yeah.
No, I was gonna just add 2 cents to this. This kind of is pretty cool that how she articulates it. As she said, the goal setting is a pretty sophisticated exercise usually, and it's all over the place. We work with multiple brands, and everybody seems to have a very different goal setting process. But if you want to have like a one common bias everybody has is to use the CAC or the MER as the goal, right? If you're a Especially if you're a early DTC emerging brand, you might just say, "What's my CAC? That's my CPA. What's my MER? That's my ROAS target," right? Maybe okay when you start because you're not getting any customers and there's no baseline to the business. As you build a baseline, the CAC and the ICAC or the advanced attribution CAC will like separate. If you remember the case study we were just looking at, the Laserway case study, his MER was 6, but his media-driven ROAS was 3, and he was managing to a 3, right? So 50% of his business roughly was baseline, right? So that's a common bias that in goal setting that almost all brands struggle with. Just keep that in the back of your mind as you're reviewing it. So you're trying to set that to what the media needs to perform, not the overall business, because the businesses tend to have like a baseline to them. Is big takeaway.
Great point. So now we're going to optimize. And I like to think of optimization in 2 buckets. So one, there's the budget allocation piece of optimization. Maybe you'd refer to that as macro optimization. So thinking about, okay, if one platform isn't performing as well, I'm going to take budget from that platform and move it over here. And that's a form of optimization, budget allocation. And again, from my past experience, one thing I found is measurement partners are really great at kind of helping that piece of the process, and a lot of them have tools, budget allocation tools that can help you make decisions about shifting budget between tactics. Again, where I think the guidance can drop off is more of the micro optimization, so optimizing within a platform. How can we actually optimize to achieve additional scale if something's performing great, or get increased efficiency if something needs to perform better. And that, as a media buyer, is what I live and breathe. So I'm bringing some of that here. So this is an example again. So if I get a scale decision, like in this case, Facebook prospecting, how can I optimize my campaign in the platform in order to do this? One of the first questions you might have before starting is, well, okay, if I can scale my campaign, how much can I scale it? And there's 2 different ways to answer that question. So if it's a larger budget that you're kind of looking to grow by, you're a large brand, like we talked about even just right before this session, you might want to do some scale testing before you up your spend by $5 million nationally. You're going to want to kind of test that in a smaller market first. Or if you're a small brand and the way you're going to scale is like 5-10K a day, you can actually test, for lack of a better word, in the platform by simply adding more budget day by day and watching how your ROAS moves over time. And once you get to the end of that process, and I'll walk you through this chart in a second, that will be your answer. And it might take you a week to hit that point. It might take you a month. But that's how you can come across it if you have smaller budgets and more time to kind of play around with that in the platform. I see a question from Eli.
Yeah, Ali, I had a quick question. I guess at the beginning of this, when you're testing what your advanced attribution multipliers are, how much does it depend on how you test increment? Like, I guess how the incrementality tests are set up, how much does that affect the decisions made afterwards? For example, if we're getting our advanced attribution multipliers from like geo holdout tests versus a scale test versus an MMM or something, does that affect the decision making here?
So obviously different ways of coming across the multiplier. What I would say is it's about this part of the process is once you've decided this is my multiplier, however you've come across it, it's just using that final multiplier. So sometimes you have all 3 data points and you're able to kind of triangulate and you feel super confident in your decision. Sometimes maybe you just have MMM and you're not really sure, your confidence in it. You can still, maybe you want to proceed with a little more caution, but the general process is still the same.
So let me plus that, Eli. So the multiplier number that you came to, you can assign an uncertainty or a confidence to that number, right? Let's just make it simple. Let's say that you have an uncertainty that you're not very confident, like how Ali said. You have a multiplier that came from MMM. It's a coarse multiplier. You're not very confident. In that case, you might just say, I don't want to increase my budgets by 3x based on that read because I'm still not super confident, but I want to go in that direction of optimal budgets, which is kind of what she's walking through. Take $10,000 a day, which is very classic how you might operate inside Ads Manager. Add a little bit more budget, see how the ROAS moves in the direction you want it to move, apply the multiplier, see what the advanced attribution ROAS would look like, and keep doing that and see if it moves in the right direction. So that's one way to do it. If you have super confidence in what you're coming back with, and you can say, hey, I've tested this, I know it's going to hold up, I want to 3x my budgets, then it's kind of a stepwise jump, right? As opposed to adding 10,000, you might say, okay, go from 100,000 a week to 300,000 a week overnight. And because you've run a test, you feel confident, and in the context of everything else, that's the right thing to do.
Yes. So if you are going to take the approach of kind of adding budget day by day, think this graph here is not a model of what to predict because it's very hard to predict what performance in a platform will actually be. Think of this as you are tracking your day by day performance as you're going along. So day 1, you're at 130K of budget. And this is what you are seeing in your platform in terms of what your ROAS was that day. But after your calculations with your multiplier that this is actually what your ROAS was that day. But basically what this is saying is day by day, you add more budget, you watch your ROAS decrease, your multiplied ROAS will decrease at the same rate. And then eventually, when you hit your goal, that answers the question, your goal ROAS, that answers the question of how much can I scale? And so in this case, we went from maybe 130 to about 400K of spend. And so was that like a 300K increase? We did that over a period of, let's say 20, 30 days. And it took us, almost a month to get to that answer. But in hindsight, right, if you're a brand that was spending 130K a day, you wouldn't want to go into Facebook tomorrow and dump 400K on day 1 into the platform. It would mess up your algorithms. You'd lose all of your efficiencies. And so this really highlights the importance of taking that day by day or week by week process, because the platforms do need time to calibrate to the additional budget.